It is so common when our children start to exhibit inappropriate behavior. For example, in the coaching session that you're about to hear, we have a boy who's playing around with cursing and using inappropriate language in school and at home. And the reaction that's very common is to start to have thoughts that this is who our child is, that we've broken them in some way and that their future is at risk and that we need to quash the behavior. We're also coming out of generations of conditioning that disciplining children needs to look like things that cause pain, that cause them to feel worse than the behavior so that they learn not to do it. But what we know from brain science, neuroscience, brain development, positive psychology, all these things is that this can actually fuel the desire, paradoxically, to continue to play with inappropriate behaviors. And so in today's coaching session, you're going to hear Sarah, Coach Ashley, who is so very aware of her child's needs through some different ways to support him to number one, hear that there is a boundary, that this is not behavior that is acceptable in this particular family's culture, and start to be more cooperative with him to create different ways to get his needs met. We have a child who has been diagnosed with ADHD. These are often kids who have a higher need for adrenaline, for more movement, that need exciting things. They get bored easily. And so you're about to maybe have your mind expanded about how we address unwanted behavior here at the Jai Institute for Parenting and in the peaceful parenting methodology that we espouse. And if you're curious to hear more about this methodology and how parent coaching might be an amazing opportunity for you, we've got a new webinar coming up in just a couple of weeks. You can go to our website, jaiinstituteforparenting.com, and you'll see information right on the homepage where you can join us. It's absolutely free. We'll get to hang out. I'll get to meet you. It'll be great. Enjoy this week's session, and we'll unpack it on the other side.
Ashley, I'm so glad you're here. How can I support you today?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time for sure. I always need help and support and coaching as a parent, especially with a lot of little kids at home. So, yeah, there's one specific scenario I did want to talk through. I have a 7-year-old who does have ADHD, struggles a little bit with impulse control. So, something where there's, maybe a little bit of a lag in skills there. So the scenario I have is that so he's been learning some inappropriate words at school. He's been coming home to ask about them first. So good that he's opened up for that perspective. However, he's also been sort of fighting the fact that they're not inappropriate and sort of pushing those boundaries there to say, well, what about this one? And what about in the little loopholes and all that kind of stuff? So I think I just want help. Like, we're trying to set the boundary of this is what we do and don't stay at home. And we've made that clear. But he's very persistent is one of his good qualities and one of his qualities that is hard for parents sometimes. So, I think for me, I want to figure out what is first off, are there like natural logical consequences that we can be maybe sort of showing him through this and maybe some like brainstorming on those and how we sort of keep that boundary, while also trying to understand like maybe what's the underlying needs behind where he's coming from there. Part of me thinks that it's like, again, just boundary pushing, just sort of seeing where the line is, and also maybe a little bit of a dopamine rush from saying these words. So how do we meet his needs, figure all that out, set the boundary, maybe have some consequences in there that are natural or logical, all of the above. So I'll take any advice you have.
What a great and relatable question. And I want to first celebrate a bunch of things that you started me out with. For example, I noticed that you said he may have some lagging skills. That's a beautiful Dr. Ross Green term that basically just means there's nothing wrong with him. He's not broken, but there are some skills where kids are going to be more ahead, if you will. And I use air quotes around that because there's no real measurement for these things. It's all subjective. But there are others that seem tougher to catch on. And I love that you are acknowledging with a compassion centered approach that a lagging skill is not necessarily a deficit. It's just a skill that needs more support. So I think that's a beautiful foundation from which we can have our discussion today. I also love it that you mentioned, yes, of course, ADHD can play into these things, but also so does childhood. Absolutely. Because I think there's no exception when it comes to kids who haven't heard a word out there and just want to know what happens when I say this word. And, ooh, when I say this word, you seem to react differently than when I say these other words. And
Yeah.
that's a fascinating psychology study for a kid to do. Kids are already in grad school when it comes to that. I'm noticing that things are different when these words come out of my mouth. I also love that you acknowledged that this is stuff he's picking up at school. So it's out there in the world. So we need to find a way to address this compassionately without shaming, without making him feel like he's in trouble. And yet you also want to have the boundaries around there are certain words that we're not super thrilled about hearing in our own home, which also makes sense. Is that a fair summary of what's going on for you?
100%. Yes. That's exactly what it is, right? Having the balance, between understanding, but also, finding better ways to express those things. Because again, also just it's, from a sibling perspective, it's modeling for younger siblings and those kind of things. There's a lot of things at play here that we want to figure out how to address it. So
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the things that we can do, which will be helpful, I think, for you from the get-go, is to, we all know this intellectually, but of course, when we're in the moment, it feels very different. Words are simply words. They don't necessarily have an emotional charge until we ascribe one to it. I remember not that long ago when my very own daughter came downstairs one day. My husband works from home, and she's like, "Oh, I'm curious, what's all the damning about?" The damning? Well, first of all, I've never heard that expression, but for her, it was just a word. She didn't realize this is a word that has kind of a loaded
yeah.
connotation. So I want to forgive my language, by the way, for anybody who's sensitive to it. I dropped one right in there, didn't I? But that being said, we are the ones who ascribe the value to these words. So, kind of channeling my inner Dr. Ross Green, I am going to invite you, dear Ashley, to combine this concept of lagging skill with the emotional charge that we as adults often add to the word and ask if there's an opportunity for temporarily neutralizing the word in your own mind so that you are able to see the underlying need, the lagging skill, the underlying need that might be driving his desire to use this. What do you think is going on beneath the surface of using this word?
I mean, I think there may be a little bit of trying to sort of fit in with the friends that are saying it and wanting to feel like he's sort of part of the group. That could be part of it. I feel like part of it is also, again, I think it's getting that reaction is sort of like, I think he's getting a reaction and he likes the reaction. Um, he's mentioned that he likes it. Like it feels good when he says it. So again, that's why I mentioned the dopamine. I sort of feel like there's something underlying there where it's like, he's sort of looking for those sort of like sensory inputs in different ways. And for some reason that gives him some kind of a little of a rush. So I think those might be part of it. I think he's trying to, again, sort of, he does like to like, he's good at arguing, right? Like he's good at sort of getting his point across. So I think it's also like another chance for him to sort of exert his autonomy and like his own opinions on life a little bit too. So yeah, I mean, those are the things that I'm thinking. Yeah.
Of the way you're thinking. These are all very legitimate needs of a
Yeah.
child. And frankly, for all of us, we all, no matter our age, have a desire to fit in with our peer group. We don't want to be the outlier, especially kids.
Yeah.
Kids don't like being the outlier because that has all sorts of natural consequences on the playground. The
Yeah.
natural consequence from that perspective is the kids don't want to play with me. Perhaps the
Mhm.
kids make fun of me. The natural consequences of not using this word can
Yeah.
be incredibly hurtful to a kid. To be clear, I am not saying, great, let's just let all the kids
Yeah.
use words. But that being said, if we address the underlying need to fit in and
Mhm.
the fact that he said it feels good to use these words. Yeah, you're right. There probably is some sort of a dopamine rush. There's something about it that feels empowering to him. So,
Yeah.
as a parent, is to say, what kind of discussions can we have,
Mhm.
perhaps with less focus around the words? Because when we add our
Yeah.
emotional reaction to the words, guess what they do? It's fuel to the fire, right?
Yeah.
But instead,
Mhm.
we have discussions not in a blaming or shaming way, but simply around concepts, neutral concepts related to how does it feel to play with your friends? How does it feel to be excluded? What are some things you can do that helps you feel included? What do you
Mhm.
like about being included? That way, you essentially give his brain some more options. But these
Yeah.
are things I can do to meet that same underlying need. And by the way, side benefit, inclusion, feelings of connection also
Yeah.
give bodies that dopamine rush that we
Yeah.
need in order to keep the brain excited, especially in an ADHD or other similar situation. So I think
Yeah.
everything over here is going to be helpful. As far as at home, though, the natural consequence isn't "Oh, fantastic. You're one of the cool parents. Let's use all the swear words together." That's not what's happening at home. And
No.
we're not comfortable with this. So, to answer your question about what is the natural consequence is essentially that I'm not comfortable with that. I don't feel as emotionally connected to you when
Mhm.
you use that kind of language. But you can say this in a very non shaming, non judgmental way so that you
Yeah.
can say, I hear that you have a really strong feeling about this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah.
And in that moment, rather than saying, what's another way you can express that, which puts the child on the spot, it sends them into fight or flight. Instead, talk about, wow, I noticed you have a really strong feeling. And then later on, when you are not in the midst of feeling that experience, and he is not in the midst of feeling that experience, you
Mhm.
might say, again, neutrally, zero charge discussion. Hey, I've noticed that you've been using some more swear words lately. I really don't like that, but I want to find safe ways for you to get your big feelings out because all of your feelings make sense. So, would you be open to brainstorming with me some other things you can say or do when you
Yeah.
really stress your point, but in a way that isn't going to feel icky to our family? How does that land with you?
No, that's really good. I mean, I think it's it it's about like breaking it down step by step and removing the emotional charge behind it, like you said. I think definitely I have some work to do to remove the emotional charge behind it because it's your natural reaction to be like, oh my gosh, like have I ruined my child's life? Like I'm not, like these words that are coming out, like, like what am I doing? Like they're only this age, that kind of thing. So I think for me, definitely doing some work on the side to like, remove those feelings behind, or at least have like the effective calmness in front of him where I'm not giving him a reaction. And we've done brainstorming sessions in the past, and I think that also gave him a lot of confidence when we did the brainstorming sessions. And I liked how you said separate the two, so that that sort of removes the shame a little bit. I know he struggled a lot, I think, with shame, like shame. Um, again with ADHD, I think he hears a lot of negative things a lot from behaviors at school and those kind of things. So I think want to make sure we're protecting his self-worth and all those types of things. So yeah, I like the idea of having one session to talk about how I hear you having these strong feelings, and then a separate time for the brainstorming. I think that would land well with him too. The brainstorming, giving him the power back, helping that autonomy a little bit too. Yeah.
Excellent. Sounds like this would land really well for him. So before we close today, I'm going to invite you to brainstorm here for just a second when you are tempted to have that emotionally charged reaction.
Yeah.
One thing you can do to help ground yourself in that moment so that you can remember all the other stuff we've been talking about today?
I almost think if I'm practicing beforehand that like this word is just a word and I have that like that mind frame inside, even maybe connecting it to some kind of a like an actual physical thing. I think you've mentioned like go touch a doorknob or something like that. Like maybe I can connect that thought to a something physical touching a part of my body or something like that, so that when I'm in that moment, I can give myself that narrative and take that second to breathe. And practicing that beforehand, I think will help me in the moment to take the second to breathe and then come back with a more logical way of thinking where I'm not attributing value to it. So yeah.
Sarah, I love this session because it's really a beautiful gateway to talk about reframing discipline, right? All of our children are going to adopt behaviors that, as responsible parents, we are going to want to shift and want to minimize and want to teach. But we're coming out of generations of parenting where the idea between discipline and negative consequences, negative reactions, harsh punishments, like really like squashing the behavior was the norm. And so you are the author of an entire book on positive discipline called Peaceful Discipline. And I would love for our listeners if you would just kind of give us a little bit of a primer on what that means.
Sure. Thank you so much for naming this because it is a huge mental shift for so many people. So I'm actually going to start with describing the book title in reverse. I'm going to start with the word discipline because people equate that with punishment. And that's not actually what it means. To discipline means to teach, not to punish. If we look at the root word disciple, a disciple is a student of someone. To disciple to someone means to teach them the ways that will feel peaceful so that they want to follow you. They want to be like you. So discipline is all about peaceful education because where emotional safety exists, humans can learn. Now, I also did mention the word peaceful. There are three parts of peaceful, and people are like, what are the three? It sounds like it's more than it is. First of all, peaceful is how we want to be towards our children or anybody around us for that matter. It is the behavior that we choose. Is it kind? Is it respectful? Is it collaborative? But even more importantly than that, our children need to perceive it as peaceful because their perception is their reality. So we might say, I'm being peaceful, but if it feels scary or oppressive to the child, it's not actually peaceful. So those are two of the three parts. And the third part of peaceful is actually what happens with our inner child. When we are peaceful with our child and our child perceives our behavior as peaceful, our inner child says, hey, this is possible. This is what I deserved all along. So even as I say that out loud to you right now, Kiva, there's a part of my inner child that sheds some of the weight that it's been carrying about my being less than or not worthy of connection and compassion and love. So our inner child gets to heal along the way.
Oh, I love that perspective so much because I've certainly with with our students, with our coaches in my own journey along this peaceful parenting path, have sometimes had these kind of like inner 3-year-old foot stomping moments. Like, this isn't fair. I didn't get treated this way. How come I'm not being, respected in the right? Like, we all have these stories that come up. And so that's such a beautiful reframe. I love that so much. I think it just bears repeating that peaceful parenting, gentle parenting does not mean that we don't get to have boundaries, does not mean that we get to have a point of view around cursing or acting, pushing envelopes, and that can still be addressed. While, what I loved about Ashley is she is so clearly, um, I'll use the word intimate, like she has an intimate knowledge of this child. And that she even asked the question, how can I hold this boundary while being aware of the underlying needs? Like, to me, that's like 90% of the equation right there. Like just that awareness, like, what's going on here?
Yes, exactly. It's one of my very favorite things about her as a human. Obviously, I know her fairly well, but she just has this expansive view of what else is possible because I know that I get to show up for myself, but I also want to show up for my child. And the narrative that society has around this doesn't seem to jive with the kind of relationship that I want to have. So I love that she had this more expansive view of how can we address this from a peaceful place because she's right. It's absolutely possible.
One of my favorite, we talk a lot here at Jai about curiosity, right? Being curious. And one of my favorite tools as a parent myself is what's in it for them, right? What's in this, using words that are provocative or, making people angry. And I think it's really important to remember that there is a reward mechanism with an emotional charge. Like, especially for kids who have high sensory needs, who need a lot of variety, variability, who get bored easily. There is, you use the word dopamine, but I want to really make it clear like that is a heightened sensation in a child's body that is in and of itself a reward mechanism. And so as parents, we can go, oh, they're needing a little adrenaline. They're needing a little friction. They're needing problems to solve. What are more effective ways that we can help them get that need met so they don't need to resort to the behavior that's outside of this family's values?
Exactly. Yes. And we as parents get to get curious about how can we help meet those needs at a really fundamental level. And we can also get curious about, does the child have the same association with that word that I do? I might have it as a major trigger, but for the child, they might be like, in fact, I lived this earlier this week. Quick, funny story. My daughter and I were downstairs reading a book on the couch. My husband was working upstairs, and all of a sudden we heard this short string of profanity come out of his mouth from upstairs. And my daughter just looked at me very neutrally and she's like, Mommy, D, that's what she calls her daddy, D just said, and she went on to quote him word for word. I was like, yes, that is exactly what he just said. Yes, that is what he modeled. And I didn't have to get super reactive to it because she was repeating the word as if I had, or he had in this case, taught her just any new vocabulary word.
Like toad, frog, snake, orange.
Exactly, exactly. So, I didn't need to lecture her about, oh, that's only for adults or whatever. I just casually called up to him, hey, just so you know, your daughter's quoting you. And we heard the door slam and it's all good. So she quickly realized, oh, okay, I think those words are some of the words we don't want to say around here. But it didn't have to be so heavy handed because she didn't have that emotional charge that he clearly did.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And, and had you responded with like, don't say that. Now, not only is there, I did something wrong, there's, DE did something wrong, and we're getting into very enmeshed kind of who's the parent, who's the child
Yes.
dynamics that can be really complicated to unwind.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. You talked about Ross Green and, children having lagging skills. Can you give a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, happy to. So, for anybody who's listening to this and you don't know the work of Dr. Ross Green, please go check him out. He is a brilliant human being. And honestly, he has one of the kindest hearts in this work of anybody I've ever met. So, big fan personally of Dr. Ross Green. But when he talks about lagging skills, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's that kids are still learning and growing so much. And we look at them and we make assumptions as parents that just because they can walk and talk and tie their shoes, that they know how to do everything else as well. Well, they are learning how to communicate. They are learning how to coexist in relationship with other human beings with various points of contention and conflict and peace and joy and all the things. And sometimes the child has a hard time figuring out, how do I navigate this situation with this person? And if they continue to struggle to figure that out, we as the adults will perceive it as a lagging skill. It's something that they simply haven't learned how to do yet. And it doesn't have to be an interpersonal interaction. It can be they haven't learned how to ride their bike yet because they have some motor difficulties. That can be a lagging skill. But whatever it is, it's something that they simply need, number one, to have us model to them more. Number two, to have us give them grace for while they learn it. And number three, they need more practice mastering that skill, because just like for all of us, certain skills take more time to master than others. I am not an expert snowboarder. I probably will never be. I have a lagging skill on the mountain. While interpersonal relationships can be no different. And that's essentially what he's talking about.
It's so good because I think one of the other very radical things that we do here at Giant is, really think about the parent-child relationship as a power with relationship, that there's no less than, there's no more important. I mean, there's obviously nuance to that, right? We're going to protect our child's safety and put ourselves in harm's way before them. So not in that way. But in terms of the relational needs, this idea that all feelings and needs matter within a relationship does not just apply to parent-child relationships. It applies to every healthy relationship that we have in our lives. And we are dismantling, and this is why I say it's radical, ideas that, that a person who has more power in a relationship should be the one who always gets their needs met. And the person who has less power in a relationship does not have the right to get their needs met. And I'm curious, in your coaching of parents, how you kind of get them through that, first of all, even understanding that that's how relationship dynamics have worked for probably most of their lives.
Yeah, brilliant question. I love that you asked that. So first of all, it's what a lot of parents experienced when they were children. Many of us grew up in the generation of be seen but not heard. And therefore, we learned to believe, not because we're wrong, but because it's what our brains made a record of, to believe that adults naturally deserve more power than children have. So all we're doing is copying the behavior that we likely experienced when we were little. And even if we were raised by very respectful parents, I almost guarantee you that if you went to school, you probably didn't experience that. If you had other social interactions with adults, they probably didn't treat you that way. So at some point, you probably just picked it up as if it were fact. So step number one is to get curious about that. Again, bringing curiosity back into the conversation and say, is that actually true? And when we land back at a no, I don't think so, we have to figure out, what now? What do we do with this information? And the biggest paradigm shift that we can make as parents is to fully accept and embody the fact that our children are whole from the very beginning. And I'm saying that slowly because I'm trying to say it in capital letters with an exclamation point at the end. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around. So rather than coming from this perspective of, I get my needs met and you don't, and sometimes the mistake we make there, by the way, is when we do something nice for our child, we think, oh, look how kind I am. I'm doing so much for them because I gave them a win this time. But that still isn't really equitable. And to your point, Kiva, we get to have healthy limits. We get to keep our children safe in all of the ways, but simply acknowledging their feelings are valid from the time they can express them, which, by the way, is day one. Their needs are valid. They are whole, even if their body size doesn't match my body size. Their little spirit in there is every bit as worthy as mine is. And how can I figure out how to show up for them in a way where they're going to believe that about themselves and grow up believing that they matter and carry that into their own adulthood someday?
Yeah. It even leads me to want to say, even their brains are whole, in the developmental stage that their brain is in, right? So of course, a 2-year-old does not have an adult brain, but they have a whole brain of a 2-year-old. And so learning to be in relationship with the brain that they have versus wishing that they had the self-control and impulse control of an adult is a much more peaceful relational strategy than being angry with 2-year-olds for being 2-year-olds or being angry with teenagers for being teenagers, and working with them to create collaborative solutions that work for them. One of my favorite moments in this coaching session was when Ashley said, when we're collaborative together and he contributes to how this might be better, he's great. I've noticed this with my kids too. When I say, how do you want to handle this? What are you going to do to make this right? How would you like to move forward? Miraculous things seem to happen. Whereas I will admit, I slid into a power over stance this week. My son came home from college. We're selling our house soon. His room was like a bomb. I was not my kindest self, for sure. And we, of course, unpacked it later. And he said, Mom, those words didn't sound like you. Like that wasn't you coming out of your mouth. What was that about? And, we talked about it. And he said, well, how about next time if you get that angry? Like, this is what you taught us to do. Go outside and hit a tree with a stick, Mom, and then come talk to me. It was so great. But in kind of my own, journaling about the situation, I was like, why did I not say, Miles, how are you going to make this right? Right? Like the room can't look like this.
Yeah.
And I did it. And peace, love. It's okay. We all get to make mistakes. These moments I experience often create more when they're handled well, like more closeness. We've been super cuddly all week. It's awesome now. But I guess I share that even I forget and you can make it better, but collaboration and letting them come up with solutions is the solution.
Yes. And Kiva, I love the compassion and the grace that you are giving yourself right now because you're human. So you are therefore worthy of forgiveness, and that includes forgiveness for yourself. And I love that he also knows from the way that you raised him, number one, this is not you. And number two, I have so much emotional safety with you, Mom, that I'm going to call you out on this in a compassionate way. And that speaks volumes to the safety that you have created with him over the years. And I am curious, Kiva, if you would be open to feedback about one thing that he said that I actually learned from Dr. Ross Green while I was talking with him. According to Dr. Ross Green, want to be careful about pairing anger with aggression, because even though we have a very natural desire to aggress when we're frustrated, we want to be careful about pairing any sort of hitting, any sort of violent act, no matter how small, with those angry feelings, because what that actually does is strengthens the neural connections of our brain saying, when I get mad, I should hit something. So that being said, I would say absolutely for somebody who's wondering, well, what do you do then? Yes, go outside. Number one, that immediately lowers blood pressure. Number two, yes, go up to that tree. But something else you can do with that tree if you want to is use your large muscle groups to push against that tree. That tree is not going anywhere. And it's not like pushing for aggression. It's pushing to engage those large muscle groups, because that releases, for simplicity, happy hormones, happy chemicals in your body that helps ground you in a beautiful way so that you can be more peaceful. So thank you for being open. Just wanted to share that too.
Yeah, totally. Totally, of course. Sarah, this is so great. Hold on. I'm just going to look at my notes. Yeah, I think we covered everything. So if you're watching this and you've got kids who are testing some inappropriate behaviors that are beyond the boundaries, try this out, right? What are their needs? What's in it for them? What are more appropriate ways to get those needs met? And how can you invite them into collaboration to create solutions? We'll be back next time on the Parent Coaching Show. Thanks so much for listening.